Good evening. It's strange there was a time when the biggest threat after sunset was the wild, but now it is the city. In the ancient past, people fought together against the uncontrollable world. But now we have made our own world, which is itself the threat. It used to be that we told each other stories and poems to lighten our hearts around the fire. But now people tell stories and manufacture poems just to screw with people. It feels as if our hearths and homes rebel against us. But I think the home is where the heart is. Wow, that sounds so dumb. Maybe I should go shop at Bed Bath & Beyond. But maybe it's so dumb just because people print it in a cursive font on crappy mass-produced decor. Words only have as much power as one grants them. And when one takes words for granted, the words can control a person without them even knowing it. But wait, home is where the heart is, isn't it? I mean, obviously, because one can't be at home without their heart being there. But what about someone who has no heart? Do they have a home? Also, if you leave home, does that mean that you leave your heart behind? Maybe you can't actually leave home at all, not until your heart dies. Legend has it that the fires who fly through the night are the hearts of the dead. So where is their home? Maybe I better just tend to the light in my own chest, make sure it doesn't burn out of control, leaving my home an ashen husk. How does the sun do it? How does she keep the shadows at bay day after day? You know, the place where I live doesn't have a fireplace. Nowadays, that's how it is for most people. But we all have a larger home called the earth, and there is a hearth that burns every night in the western sky. What is that thing that's the moon? Maybe it's a UFO. So many people have talked about the Hill case now. Why don't we talk about what Nigel Watson had to say about it? Plus, where are all my UFO sisters at? Did they just all go to MUFON? All this and more tonight. I'm Rachel Nelson.
I'm the gray alien.
Luis Cayetano.
Hi, Luis. Welcome.
Hi.
And welcome, everyone.
Yes.
What's up?
Nice mask.
Yes. Cheap foam mask. One of a few alien masks I have. We've been doing this for a year.
Yeah. Who knows why?
Yeah. 1 year.
Congratulations, everybody.
Yes.
It's all been just a huge grift.
We started off with a different name, but it's been a year. Yeah.
Yes, it's the world's least successful grift.
That's right.
Oh, shoot. Dang it. Come on.
Yeah, I've been really digging into the hills this week.
Yeah, digging into the hills.
Digging in. I've got materials just everywhere.
Okay.
This book, UFO Religion, singular. It does, incidentally, I'm up to the abductions chapter, which does talk about the hills.
Yeah. Yeah, that book I think is over there somewhere. I honestly haven't read it. I just kind of skimmed it before, but I do have that one.
It's pretty good.
All right, on with the show.
Yeah.
Welcome to UFO Sunset. I'm sorry, I'm experiencing some technical difficulties. Just give me one moment here, people. Thank you for your patience. And now for the rebrief. A new firefly from 100 million years ago has been identified. Fireflies were already around 100 million years ago at the time of the dinosaurs. Fireflies are a type of flying beetle that are known for abdomens that light up at around dusk, making them resemble small flying orbs of light. A team of researchers identified a new species of firefly in a paper published in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B in September, with lead author Professor Chen-Yang Kai, excuse my pronunciation, at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, Nanjing. They discovered the new firefly species from a specimen encased in a piece of amber from the Hukong Valley in northern Myanmar. The species is named Flammarionella hehaikuni, getting their genus name from the astronomer Camille Flammarion. The specimen was identified as female. One other ancestor of the firefly from around the same period and region was identified in 2021. The species belonging to the extinct beetle family Cryptophangodidae had less specialized light organs, though. This new finding shows that fireflies that created the types of light displays we're familiar with today had already evolved by the mid-Cretaceous. According to the new paper, quote, "The growing fossil record of lampyrids provides direct evidence that stunning light displays of different fireflies were already established by the Cretaceous," unquote. Cattle deaths are rising in California due to bird infections. Today, the LA Times reported a rise in cattle deaths in California dairy herds due to the spread of the H5N1 bird flu virus, a virus that infects birds and other animals. The virus was first reported in California in August and has since affected 124 reported herds as well as 13 humans. I believe that might be an error there. Oh, yes, no, that's correct, actually. Okay. This has resulted in a rising death toll for dairy cattle. Dairy farmers have been placing cattle carcasses on the sides of roads or separating them from people and cattle to decrease the spread of the disease. According to Anya Rodabo, the CEO of a California dairy trade organization called Western United Dairies, different breeds and stocks of cattle are being affected differently. For example, Holstein cows appear to be affected more than Jersey cows. Rodabo told the LA Times, quote, "The reason is because Holsteins produce more milk, so they have more volume for the virus to enjoy," unquote. The first report of human infection by the bird flu came from Texas in April. The Center for Disease Control reported Friday that there are 27 confirmed cases of human bird flu infections in the United States so far, but there are no known cases where the virus has been spread between humans. And a solar storm displayed auroras as far south as Mexico. Following continued increased solar activity, there was a massive auroral storm on the night of October 10th and 11th, Bright, colorful auroras were visible across much of North America, as far south as Chihuahua and Zacatecas, Mexico, as well as in the UK and Northern Europe, and across Australia in the Southern Hemisphere. Between October 7th and 10th, the Tsuchinshan Atlas comet became visible to the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, or SOHO. Tsuchinshan Atlas is also currently visible in the Northern Hemisphere, and it's still possible to observe for a few more nights. At the same time the SOHO captured the comet, it also observed multiple X-class flares and strong CMEs, or coronal mass ejections. This included an X2.1 class flare from the sunspot R3842, which previously produced an X9 solar flare the week before. This was the most powerful solar flare of solar cycle 25. The X2.1 flare also resulted in shortwave radio blackouts over the Americas and the Pacific Ocean, as well as a CME. The next day, an X1.8 solar flare was observed from sunspot 3848. On October 10th and October 11th, the accompanying CME produced auroras in the northern and southern hemispheres, visible far outside of the normal polar regions where auroras are typically visible. The last time such a powerful aurora was observed was during May of this year. This is a dim image of the aurora that I made in Northeast Portland using the night mode on my camera. Here are some more images. Here are a couple of images that were made by Jeff Knox in Vancouver, Washington. And here is an image made by Vanessa Bolilko in Chicago. I believe this is on Lake Michigan. Really fantastic image here. And here's another one from Vanessa. All right, so first on the agenda, I'm going to be talking about, what do you got there?
Oh, the book Louise was just showing, UFO Religions by Gregory.
Wow, it looks like it's in mint condition.
Well, that's because I keep all my books in mint condition. That's why they're so shiny, is because like I've got Mylar covers I put on everything that are hard. But that's why I prefer hardback, so I can put Mylar covers on it, so everything stays perfect in mint condition.
What's that book, Jeff?
This one?
Yeah.
Alien Abductions by Terry Matheson. It's really good. He's a literature professor, English teacher, and he analyzes basically the narrative techniques of these different abduction stories, like the Hills, the Betty Andreessen case, and how basically their stories were sold, like how authors like John Fuller like leave things out to kind of sell a certain narrative or include certain things, and it's really interesting. It was mentioned in Marcella Truzzi's article in the Encounters of Indian Heads book, and so I've been reading that book again.
So in a previous episode, I commented that I wish there was more girls here, and Jeff responded by saying, what did you say, Jeff? We're all just people.
We're people, we're all people, all humans.
Right, but we are all people with genders, except for the rare person who identifies as agender. And, we're all people with sex and gender, so that affects us, on a day-to-day basis, both systemically through how our society is organized, as well as through, biases that we carry around as individuals and as groups. So I created a little, well, Jeff and I had a sort of debate in the Discord. I I've observed this, and other people have observed it as well. I remember that Leah Prime explicitly made comments about this on the Invisible Night School, and it was definitely something that I observed at the time. And I've heard other people make similar comments, which is that certain areas of UFO culture, certain platforms and certain groups are very male dominant. There's a lot of men there and not very many women at all. So what I did was I kind of looked at some data about this, or I collected some data about this. Mind you, I'm not like a scientist. I've never actually done a study or anything like that before, but basically what this is, I looked at several different sources to see the representation of men versus women. And so what you see here, this spreadsheet is, this comes from this website, which is the Center for UFO Studies Board, Consultants, and Friends. Okay, so that's all of the names here are the first names that appear in the column on the left here. Okay, and then the next data source on this spreadsheet comes from the MUFON Board of Directors and Board of Functional Directors. So, and they have pictures of all of these people there, just right on the page. Okay. So yeah, and then what I did was I just compared these two lists. First of all, I identified the apparent gender of each person. And so what we've got here is there are no women on the board of CUFOS. There is one consultant who's a woman, and that's Phyllis Bettinger. They also include a list of friends, which are various different prominent UFO researchers. Fran Ridge is not actually Fran Ridge is a guy.
NICAP. Fran Ridge essentially runs what's left of NICAP.
Huh, okay. Interesting.
Like CUFOS, NICAP and CUFOS don't exist really, except in the name. They don't actually function anymore.
Yeah, well, I mean, okay. Be that as it may, they still have a functioning website, though, it appears, because they've updated their website. It exists as a history sort of archiving thing, right? Or something like that?
Yeah, it exists to preserve its history, but they don't actually do anything new.
Okay. They don't do UFO investigations,
No.
but it exists as an organization.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Okay. So if we compare MUFON, though, MUFON actually has not perfectly even, but much closer to even split. Yeah. So there's actually more women on the board of directors than there are men, and then out of the functional directors, there's only one woman. So what these colored cells are, these show the ratio of men to women. So for CUFOS, it's 13-1, and for MUFON, it's 4-3. And if you compare those two ratios, that means that CUFOS has 9.75 times more men than MUFON. Granted, there's not a lot of people here, but they are the directors. So they're the people and the consultants.
That's not a complete list, though, right? Of MUFON's directors. Isn't Kathleen Martin their director of experiencer research?
I don't know. Maybe.
And like Ron James is basically a media guy that pays money to exploit UFOs to make money for his business. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying, I'm not endorsing MUFON here, nor am I trying to like shame Kufos or something. What I'm just doing is just showing, looking at, because Kufos, a lot of the people in Kufos are also the same people that are listed. Not all of them, but many of them are the same people that are listed in the UFOs in government as the UFO history group. So, which takes me to my next source of data, which is UFOs in government, right? So here's that book. So we have.
Can I just say just real quick one thing?
Yeah.
I mean, I already said it. I think it's important to note. Again, I think some of this makes some sense when you're comparing an active group like MUFON that's still doing things and like is constantly changing, and so they have better representation compared to a group like Kufos, which hasn't done anything in 2 decades. And so it's got a lot of older people, and you've got a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of the great women researchers that used to be on Kufos board and consultant list have died in the last 10, 20 years, which is really sad. We've lost a lot of great researchers. So I just think it's important to note that you're dealing with an old group that's not even active anymore, and you're comparing it to an active group. And so people should keep that in mind. But yeah,
okay. Well, it would be really, you know, the thing is I would like to actually kind of look at this more in depth. And I noticed Erica Lukes had posted a letter on Twitter the other day, which was from Kufos in 1976, and it listed the board of directors at that time, and it was all men. And the only woman that was listed was in a secondary list. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was Elaine Hendry as basically in a secretarial position.
And it wouldn't exist without Mimi Heineck, who was very much the researcher that Heineck himself was.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm not denying that there were a lot of UFO researchers who were women back in the day. What I'm really trying to get at is contemporary research and what it kind of looks like, at least what it looks like to me. And, you know, like I'm trying to kind of verify claims that I've heard from other people. Okay, so this is UFOs in government. These are the listed. It doesn't say what their roles were in the book. Michael Swords was the main author. Robert Powell was the editor. And then all of these other guys, Klaus Vaughn, Vicente Juan Ballester Olmos, Bill Chalker, Barry Greenwood, Richard Thiem, Jan Aldrich, and Steve Purcell, they contributed more or less to the book, right? Is that correct?
Yeah. Are you meaning to change the slide at all? Because this is still.
Oh, what? Oh, shoot. Okay. Okay, hold on a second.
Yeah, so on the book, Michael Swartz is the primary author about all the United States stuff, which is most of the book. Like I said, Robert Powell did, a lot of like editing, administrative, and other like background kind of work. And there is, I believe, 3 chapters. VJ Ballester Olmos wrote the chapter on Spain because he, was a Spanish UFO guy. Bill Chalker wrote a chapter on Australia, and Klaus Vaughn wrote one on like Sweden and stuff. Okay. So, and the rest of the people on the list were consultants. Yeah, they provided,
Okay, and so then this is I just wanted to show the copyright page because it also lists. It actually says what their roles were on the copyright page.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, Steve Purcell did the photo illustrations. So this is the UFO history group as listed in the book, which according to the blurb was formed for the purposes of the book. And so according to Jeff, this group doesn't exist anymore. Is that correct?
No, I just said it's not like it's an informal group. Like it doesn't actually do anything.
So it does exist.
In the sense that, yeah, these people know each other. They get together a couple times a year and they talk about life and what they've been working on. Like but in the sense that they're actually doing some collaborative work together. And no, there's no like actual they don't do anything.
Okay, and mind you, I'm not trying to attack this group. I have a lot of respect for a lot of these people, and I don't respect MUFON, but I do have respect for these people, and I'm not trying to like do a takedown or something. All I'm doing is saying, hey, maybe there actually is, a lack of female representation in some quarters of UFO culture. So all of the contributors to this book are male. So let's go back to the other slide. And just to show you, because I guess I didn't have that up before, this is what the Ufos website looks like. So we've got Mark Roediger, George Eberhardt, Bill Murphy, David Marler, Thomas Eddie Bullard, Jerome Clark, Michael Sword. So a lot of the members of the Ufos board are also members of the Informal Swords group, aka the UFO History Group.
Because that's exactly what it was. It was the Ufos people just meeting again to write a book.
Okay. And so if we go to the Ufos website, the Center for UFO Studies is a nonprofit organization that includes scientists, professionals, academics, investigators, and others, all volunteers dedicated to the study and analysis of the UFO phenomenon. So from the website, it appears that that Ufos does exist as an organization. I don't think that they do UFO investigations, although in Mark Roediger's talk yesterday, he was talking about receiving a case. So I don't know what he meant by that, and I'm sure that the individual members of Ufos investigate UFOs in their spare time.
But what members of Ufos?
What I mean is
there are no members of Ufos. Like
the Ufos board.
In fact, even when Ufos was around, they didn't have members.
Board members here.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a board by law for any nonprofit organization.
Right. So they're board members.
Yeah,
those are the members of Ufos. Those are the people that I'm talking about.
Right. Ufos was never. What did you mean, Jeff? That Ufos didn't have any members?
It wasn't like your MUFONs or like your NICAPs where they had different groups of people that in different places that would investigate sightings, right? Like, yeah, they did take sightings. Like we know they took sightings, and Alan Hendy would investigate them, and other people like Don Schmidt back in the day, I guess, was director of research for Ufos for a while, would investigate sightings. For a while, they had a telephone number that eventually they shut down and stopped taking like reports and stuff. So they did get people that would report stuff to them, but it wasn't like MUFON or these other organizations that had an investigative body that could go out and investigate this stuff. There was really like a small team of people around that, if they knew somebody, they could send somebody to go look into things. Like it didn't really ever have a formal body of investigation. It was mostly like Hendry ran the investigations and would publish results. And
yeah, like MUFON has like chapters in every state and they have like teams of field investigators everywhere. The only real field investigation that Ufos did was the Yakima investigation. Yeah,
it was more like an advocacy or like an umbrella organization, kind of like for Hynek to.
Yeah, like they did research, but they didn't really do.
Yeah, I mean, they absolutely did things like conferences, and they tried to put out, and they did their semi-scientific peer-reviewed journal, the Journal of UFO Studies, and of course their more well-known International UFO Reporter, which is the more mainstream kind of UFO publication. But mostly it was sharing research they got from other places. But yeah, so it was always a small, like Ufos was never like a large organization or anything.
But so it was Hendry and who else? Because I know that Hendry mentions in his book a bunch of like consultants, at least,
like people like John Timmerman, of course.
Well, I'm gonna interrupt you guys because I want to get back to this. Okay, so this is the UFOs and Government this is basically, I call this a preliminary analysis because I kind of want to go a little bit more in depth in looking at this personally. So this list here is the contributors and thanks listed by male and female, and it's all male, no females listed, right? But we know, of course, that there were many female investigators, right? You know, like Coral Lorenzen, who co-founded APRA with her husband and was really the lead person on that. Isabel Davis, who was, like you were saying, a mentor to some of these people in the Swords group.
Co-founded the Civilian Saucer Intelligence Organization.
Yeah, Anne Dreffel, and yeah. So this is these are okay. So I didn't put a ratio here. I confused myself there for a second. I didn't put a ratio if it was just listed as 0 for female. Now what you see here on the right is the name index. Fortunately, they actually put an index of not all of the names, but many of the names actually included in the book. I noticed, and I want to look back at that too. This is another reason why I want to go more in depth into this, because I think there were actually other women listed in the book that are not listed in the name index. And so what we have are, you know, the names, and then next to that are the page numbers. And so this is just a summary of that. This is the male to female name ratio. So there's 719.
Was this supposed to be up?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, because we haven't seen anything if you've been talking about this.
Okay.
No worries. It's all good. We got it up now. So yeah, okay, there's authors. Thanks.
When did it go down? Did you guys see the other stuff?
It was never up. It was never up in the first place.
You mean like you didn't see this?
No.
You got to be kidding me. Okay.
Okay.
But we got the gist of what you said, Rachel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go over these again. So this is the Ufos page that I was trying to show earlier. So these are the board members, the current board members. This is the MUFON board of directors. Here's the functional directors from MUFON. Okay, and then this is the data from on the Ufos page. So there's a ratio of 13-to-1 women listed in the board of directors and the consultants. And so there's one female listed there, that's Phyllis Budinger. And then this is MUFON. So, and then this is the ratio, 13-to-1 compared to 4-to-3. And then if you compare those ratios, that's almost 10 times, the ratio of men to women is almost 10 times higher for Ufos.
Yeah.
Okay, and so this is the UFOs and government data. So basically, here's UFOs and government. Here are the contributors. This is the UFO history group that was formed for the book, and it's composed of the contributors to the book. But the UFO history group also still exists informally as the Swords group. So a group of people who meet at Michael Sword's house twice a year. So this is the name index from the UFOs and government. I emboldened all of the female names here. There might be some minor errors in this data, but this is the full list here. And each of these gaps here, this is where there were secondary names. So right, like here you got Reutersvard, Asa, and Eric.
That's the couple that allegedly took the only photo ever of a ghost rocket in Sweden.
Amy said that all the women are into vampires. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a good point, Amy. UFOs are not. The thing is that there are a lot of women that investigate UFOs, especially historically, but especially, I think, in less nuts and bolts contexts.
So this is for the book that's about specifically UFOs and government, right? This is the bibliography.
Yes. Yeah. No, well, this is not the bibliography. This is the name index. So this is the list of names that are listed in the book. And UFOs and government basically focuses on the relationship between the role of UFOs in the military in various different countries in the mid-20th century, from about 1947 to about 1970.
So most of these names are going to be military officers. So of course they're going to be men.
Right. But, you know, in any case, there are 719 male names listed, and there's 22 female names listed. The number of male references is 1,677 compared to 37 female references. So the number of references is just taking each of these numbers, including like if it's like 151 to 152, just counting that as one reference. So this is not, this data is, I just tried to do what I could do in a short period of time. So this data could be more precise. And these are the ratios. So you've got, this is the male to female ratio, 719 to 22. So there are 33 more times more male names than female names, and the percentage of female names is a little less than 3%. And for the ratio of references is 1,677 to 37. So the male references, there's 40 times more male references than female, and the percentage of female references is 2.16%. Now, I would like to go more in depth into analyzing this book in this way. It is a good point that, yeah, this is a book that's about American military history. And I really think that the book should not be called UFOs and Government, maybe, I don't know, but maybe UFOs and Military. But, you know,
it's the same thing.
Not really, but
it's the governments involved, these countries' governments' involvements, which isn't always military. Like, for example, in some of these other countries, it's not military, it's scientific. So it's about how governments approach this topic historically.
Yeah, well, and the thing is that, you know, I think that I noticed some interesting things just looking briefly at it, like Jerome Clark gets listed a number of times, mostly as, right, because of his UFO encyclopedia, mostly because of his UFO encyclopedia, but Jenny Randall's name doesn't appear in this book at all. Lynn Cato doesn't appear in this book at all, even though Lynn Cato wrote the bibliography for the Condon Project, for the Colorado Project, you know, working at the Library of Congress, right? But her name isn't mentioned in the book at all.
But she didn't write any historical analysis of the UFO topic to reference. She wrote a bibliography.
Yeah, but I mean, doesn't that at least deserve being mentioned? I don't know. Like, I don't know. And
I'm seeing something maybe worth mentioning, but like what Jeff mentioned about like a lot of these people would be former military officers, but also the general topic of like cloak and dagger intelligence stuff is like seems to appeal a lot more to men than women generally. So could there possibly be like some sort of control study you can do where you look at like government and environment, or government and something else versus government and UFO, right? And so that might show, is this like within the sort of bounds of what we would expect when dealing with like government / military involvement in a topic, or is this like a skewed kind of, representation?
I think that there's a problem. I mean, I do think that that's something that I want to do, is look at other sources that are similar to this one that talk about slightly different topics, but also, ones that are actually that have female contributors. Because the thing is that like, there probably would be more female names showing up. I mean, there's no mention whatsoever of the Women's Army Corps, or the Women's RAF, or the Women's RAF, or anything like that. And Mary Von King, who I don't know that they would have been aware of this at the time, but Erica Lukes and Jack Brewer, they point out that Mary Von King is one of the co-founders of Council Services. So, there were like women involved in intelligence even way back even before World War II, there were women involved in cloak and dagger stuff. And I feel like even if there was just one woman contributor to this book, there would probably be way more female representation,
Why don't you take Kate Dorsch's PhD dissertation and check her bibliographic references and see if she mentions more women in UFOs? I doubt she does. I'd be surprised.
What year is that from?
A couple years ago.
All right, send it to me in the Discord.
Yeah, because another thing, a lot of I think if you probably looked at, I wouldn't be surprised. I'd actually like to look at UFO-related dissertations, how many were written by men versus women, because I wouldn't be surprised if it's more women than men, actually, because a lot of the dissertations I come across are actually written by women in this topic that relate to the UFO topic. Like, so academia, I think there's a skew, but yeah.
Okay, well,
so
let's move on to the let's move on. I don't know. If I was talking about something else, you guys wouldn't be saying anything. Okay, so
no, we're just saying you have to compare to other things, because nobody doubts there's more of a male representation. Of course, nobody doubts that. The question is that different than other things at the time in that context?
Oh, I think somebody. Rachel froze.
What just happened? That was so crazy. Okay.
You froze.
I'm not taking that for granted, Jeff, and I pointed it out, and I think it's a good point, but I'm just showing the preliminary data. And the fact of the matter is that this book had no female contributors, and the topic was about a very male-centric topic. Maybe maybe it would have been slightly different if there was a female contributor.
Like who? Name one person that was qualified. Name one.
Well, I mean, they could have at least mentioned Jenny Randles. She's still alive.
But this isn't about you. This is a very niche focused book.
Jenny Randles studied military cases.
Is there even a chapter on here on the UK? No.
Yes, there is.
Well, not really.
Is there not a chapter on the UK? Well, there's one on Australia.
I mean, there's like Ghost Rockets and World War II, like that short that covers some UK stuff.
Okay, whatever.
What about Leslie Kane? I'm not saying she's like, well qualified, but she's in the topic. And would you say every contributor here is like a serious, quote unquote, serious person necessarily?
Yeah, they're more serious critical historians of the topic.
Yeah,
not journalists. Yeah.
Okay, so moving on. The the reliability of UFO witness testimony. And again, I am not trying to do some sort of takedown or anything. I have huge respect for Vijay Ballester Olmos. I don't know much about Richard Hayden, but I'm sure that, you know, he does great work based on reading this, you know, the sections of this book that I have. But what this is it's looking again at the contributors, and this is just looking at the contributors. So this is looking at mainly the table of contents. I was going to do like the acknowledgements in each section, but I didn't really have time to do that. And again, I think that I would like to look at this stuff more in depth. And I absolutely have been wanting to do a control, but again, I didn't have a good data source. And I asked you guys about this in the Discord too. So you could have provided control sources if you wanted to. So what I did was I took the names of all of the authors, and what else did I do? I also included the editor's acknowledgments from the end of the book.
Simon, you mean Reliability of Your Witness Testimony? That book came out, what, last year?
Yes. And I'm looking for contemporary sources. That's exactly what I'm trying to look for, is contemporary sources. So UFOs in Government is from 2014. This is from 2023. So there are 58 male contributors and 6 female contributors. I also looked at what names had doctor in front of them. So there are 30 male doctors, 2 female doctors. But if we look at the ratio, right, so it's 58 to 6. So there's about 10 times more male contributors to female contributors, which, yeah. And then the percentage of female contributors is less than 10%. The male ratio of doctors is, oh, did I type that right? Wait, what does that mean? Hold on a second. Oh, male ratio of doctors to not doctors is 2.071, and the female ratio of doctors to not doctors is 3. So then if you compare that, the number of female doctors, the ratio of female doctors is actually slightly higher. So you got male to female here, it's at 0.69, so it's below 1. So if you switch that around, right, the female to male would be higher. And then if we look at the acknowledgements, the percentage of acknowledgements that are female is 6.45%. So this is the acknowledgements here. We've got Elizabeth Loftus. Of course, she would be mentioned because she's like, her work is essential to this type of book. And Julia Lavarnway. So, yeah, I mean, I think that there could be a lot of reasons for what's going on here, but I think that it seems to me that, yeah, in the sources that are nuts and bolts, very academically and or scientifically rigorous, contemporary UFO books and publications in the West and in America, based on this, looks like it's very, very, very male-centric. And, you know, when I was hanging out around the Invisible Night School and that sort of online scene, it was all men. There's very few exceptions to that. You know, there's me and like one other trans or one other trans woman, and like then you had Leah Prime and like maybe one other woman who was not there most of the time, who was a pilot.
Does reliability of UFO witness testimony, did you confirm that the names that didn't list doctor aren't actually doctors? Because a lot of fields don't put doctor in front of their name, even though they have a PhD.
Because they asked to do that. No, I didn't check that. That's a good point. I don't know. I could go and check that. But again, I was just trying to do what I could do manageably during the period of time that I had, which was a week, and I didn't want to exhaust myself. I would really, like I said, I would really like to spend more time with this and actually look at other sources to try to find comparison data and control data. Yeah, Linda Moulton Howe is the most probably well-known sort of UFO researcher, but I think, but there were a lot of women who were very prominent UFO researchers in the 20th century. That a lot of the names that we listed earlier, like Coral Lorenzen, Isabel Davis, Jenny Randles. These were often people who founded and were the directors of big organizations. Jenny Randles was the director of the British UFO Research Association or agency. I always get that confused, but
I feel it's also important to remember probably one of the greatest UFO historians in history, Wendy Connors, who unfortunately is not with us anymore.
Mhm.
But she wrote some of the, before UFOs in government, she wrote a book with Michael Hall that was kind of a forerunner. And she's also did the Faded Disc Project. All those old audio files people keep listening on channels from Eyes on Cinema to everywhere else, those all come from her pretty much. And that she archived all these videos and tapes of like audio recordings from way back in the day and then released in these collections.
Mhm.
So one of the greatest historians in all of UFO history was Wendy Connors.
Yeah, but if we look at contemporary UFO research, I think that there's a clear bias there.
Well, in 10 years, all these guys will be dead, and then, it'll be cleared out.
Well, I mean, I feel like there could be a lot more people participating and contributing into the Swords group who are younger, and really pushing the field forward. And I mean, I think there's other young people too that there's other young women who I think are serious researchers in one way or another, and who don't skew towards disclosure or just more woo stuff. But even if you're more into woo, you can still be a good UFO researcher,
Jensine Anderson.
Yeah. Well, and also Erica Lukes, who I think is incredibly awesome. Emily Louise does really good historical research as well. Yeah, you see a lot more women involved. I mean, it's not that there aren't women involved in UFOs today. It's just that I think that there's sort of like different subcultures that are very male centric and subcultures that are very female, or that are more female centric. Like the UAP sort of advocacy crap on UFO Twitter is very, very male centric, I think.
No, absolutely not.
You don't think so?
Nope.
What do you think, Louise?
The disclosure stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on UFO Twitter specifically.
Oh, Twitter. No, I see a mix. I think the more kind of obnoxious people are male, but the female, there are a lot of female advocates who are sort of more into the woo stuff, I would say, and more into the spiritual aspect or
and the advocacy aspect.
Okay, that's fair.
Maybe.
That's fair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think it's problematic because I think that the more the more disclosure side of it and the more like UAP side of it feels like it's more inclusive. You know what I mean? And the more like like the academically geared, like trying to do serious research side of it is there. It feels like it's a lot of older researchers and it's a lot of men. That's what it feels like to me.
I mean, I think that's logically makes sense. You can't force. I mean, it takes decades to get to the experience to where they're qualified to do this. This is why this was specifically, for example, the book was veteran researchers who have been digging in the files for decades already. You can't just create a young person that has that experience and knowledge out of nowhere. Like, that's just the truth. It's hard to get people interested in the history of this topic, period. Just
yeah,
period.
well, I mean, the thing is that I'm not going to just say that this is we can say that there's an explanation for this. I don't think that it's just that simple, because the fact of the matter is that systemic sexism is something that exists in our society. And I've heard other claims from other people that are like, oh, well, I think that the reason for this is because this has turned into a boys club, basically, because it's all older people. And I so that's the thing, is that, right, because back in the day, it used to be that there were a lot of serious women researchers, and now there's not.
Because
So I don't really know. I'm not going to try to posit an answer here, but I do think that there is a kind of bias, and I don't think it's just necessarily accidental. I'm not saying that it's a conspiracy, because it definitely isn't, but it could be for other reasons.
What is like I'm thinking like there could be issues here to do with systemic sexism and those sorts of issues, but at what point do we say that like something is fair? Because like we don't want to overcorrect and say like women have to be this proportion. Like it doesn't have to be presumably 50%, right? Male, female. Because what if there are like just inherent biases or preferences that males and females have in terms of we're drawn to certain topics.
Yeah, certain statistical asymmetries aren't necessarily because of sexism, or sometimes, like you say, it's people just drawn to different things or have different interests. And we can't force people to be interested into something, like just for the sake of making things equal and being inclusive. Like,
well, the thing is I feel like all of these women, like end up going towards disclosure, like that.
Do you think somebody's forcing them that way?
No, I don't think they're forcing them that way, but I think it might be that men are driving them out by their behavior. Like Isabel Davis was a very rationalist UFO researcher, right? And she was the founder of CSI and was this very prominent, influential UFO researcher, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, wouldn't you love to see researchers like that were against disclosure?
That would be absolutely fantastic. Like I say, I'm absolutely for it if we want to get more.
And I mean, there are rationalist women interested in UFOs, like Charlie Weiser, right?
Yeah.
Or more skeptical, or more.
I don't think
rationalist.
She would consider herself a UFO researcher, though. But yeah,
right. But she researches UFOs, and yeah, she wouldn't. Yeah, but she researches UFO cases and stuff like that from a very skeptical, materialist standpoint. And so I feel like there could easily be something going on here. That is all I'm going to say about that. And again, you know, I'm not trying to. This is not like me trying to like accuse Michael Swords of anything or something like that. I don't know what the Swords group is like, and I don't understand the social politics behind that. All I get are secondhand stories because I've just been involved in this online. But I mean, you know, I'm going to be skeptical of someone who says we're all just people. You know, like, you know, that doesn't really, that I don't think that that kind of remark really addresses issues of gender disparity and stuff like that. Because no, you
I
know,
wasn't trying to. I was just saying we should try to treat everyone equal with respect. That's all I was trying to say. I wasn't trying to ignore the fact that there's gender disparities or biasism or sexism or any other kind of prejudices that exist and absolutely do exist. I was just saying we should be trying to treat people the same. We should be treating people with respect equally. That's the only thing I was trying to say.
Okay, well, was I being disrespectful to you? Or like, I mean, I don't understand, like me saying that there are no girls here is not a disrespectful thing to say.
I didn't say it was. I'm sorry. I
Okay,
think you're just
so
reading too much into YouTube comments. I think you're trying to find meaning and intent that's just not there. But I should just.
I'm not trying to find meaning or intent that's not there. I just don't understand why you would say something like that. Because
Why I say
it's
we should respect people? I don't. I mean, I
no,
just. I don't
no,
think
no.
that that's
Why?
an opinion.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Okay, I said I wish there was more girls here. It's all boys. I'm the only girl here. And then you said, well, we're all just people. What did you? What was your intention of saying that? What was the
Yeah,
intention
we're all
behind that?
humans. We're all equal. We're all the same. Like I don't. I mean, I don't get where you're going with this. To be honest, like.
Okay, forget it.
Yeah,
I don't,
I
I
think we
don't,
should just
I
move
don't know
beyond
if I can
this.
really have this conversation on the show because I don't. What is the purpose of saying that in that context?
Trying to create unity. I mean, I don't get what the issue with that is.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood you.
I think you absolutely did. Yeah. Anyways, we should move on from that.
But I would recommend still reading Egesian's book. He mentions a lot about you know, males and females and their representation. So he's got a lot of examples, which I think are historically and currently relevant.
Yeah, I would like to read Egesian's book.
Because he also does it from the international point of view, not just America. So there could be other things to explore there too.
So moving on, did you guys want to talk about anything that you read in the last couple of days or in the last week or whatever?
Yeah. So again, the UFO religion book, he's got chapters here about like sightings and the airship stuff as well, from the late 19th century, crashes and conspiracies and abductions and contactees. He also talks about theosophy. So that book sort of, I mentioned as well on the Discord that it sort of feels a little bit like a summary of Egesian's book, even though this one was written in 2007. But I really recommend that. I'm also reading one about, I don't have it with me, it's called UFO, or the Science of UFOs. It's like a physics treatment by an astronomer of like, if UFOs were real and they were actually alien, like how would they work, right? So like, what are the physics involved in terms of wormholes and all that crap? But it's sort of like a devil's advocate type of thing, right? It's not saying that UFOs are ET. It's just saying like, if they were, how would we explain their behavior? So that book's sort of interesting as well. But that's basically what I've been reading.
Yeah, that guy has another book called First Contact. It's like about SETI and the search for extraterrestrial life and stuff. That somewhere on my shelf. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. And I'm also reading this one, which is this guy's an Earth system. No, he's an astronomer actually, but he's looking at the Drake equation and thinking about civilization. Like we talked about this previously, right? The issues to do with how do we define civilization and can we extrapolate that to other possible cases? And he tries to do that, thinking about, the fact that we have to sort of think of ourselves as a planetary civilization in order to survive because of our thermodynamic relationship with the planet. So I think that's an interesting perspective, regardless of like whether we can extrapolate to thinking about extraterrestrials. But it's certainly the case that we have to think about thermodynamics when we think about our type of society and how we interact with the planet.
I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble with my controls here, so I don't know.
I think, didn't Adam Frank have a book before that on something?
Did he?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, he's had several books of them. He did a book a year ago called The Little Book of Aliens.
We can hear you, Rachel. I can hear
Okay.
you. Yeah, The Little Book of Aliens. Oh, that's right. I haven't read that.
And one of his, I think his first books was a book, I think I have some called About Time, and that came out like 2011.
Mm-hmm. But we're not going to get planetary thinking with these morons in the GOP. That's for sure.
You mean Musk isn't going to save humanity?
Nope. Musk is not only not going to save humanity, he's going to divert the space program to like all kinds of wasteful and super inefficient architectures.
Yeah.
So sorry, I was totally distracted while you were talking. Jeff, did you want to talk about the Marcello Truzzi chapter?
Not really. I mean,
Okay.
I just thought we would go over when we go over the book chapter, just if I recall anything, I'd mention it.
Okay, let's go to the chapter.
And this.
Oh,
A
no,
lot of
the previous chapter, sorry.
Yeah, previous one.
Yeah.
I was going to say, a lot of these chapters in the Reliability of Jehovah's Witness Testimony book, I think existed before the book. They were just either republished in the book or they were kind of slightly changed. For example, this chapter by Wim van Utrecht on the lunar terror in Poland is, he already had this paper like out beforehand. Like a lot of these papers existed before this book did. And this is a case I have also, I got a thread on, and you can actually find this original paper in my thread, as well as now the one in this book.
All right. Luis, did you want to take over the discussion?
Oh, sure. So this chapter or this paper is about a Polish case in the 1979, although initially they thought that it was in 1980, right? But then they went back and checked some sources and they were able to pinpoint it to 1979 because it had been mentioned in the media, I think in Poland at the time. So this is like a case where there was a pregnant woman and I think a couple other people in an ambulance, and they were driving to the hospital, and on the way they saw a UFO. It actually turned out to be the moon, and this author and others have been able to really nicely pinpoint like basically the entire trajectory of the journey and like where the moon was in the sky, and some of the common perceptual errors that people make when they're looking at the moon. And there was even like not border guards, but the people that are crossing who are sort of
The train crossing people. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, the train crossing people. And one of them even said, "Is that the moon?" when they were looking at the moon. But then there was like a mention of radiation, which again shows the ubiquity of this trope in ufology. Everybody knows that UFOs are meant to be radioactive. And then like the crossing people changed their minds and they thought it was something more menacing than the moon. And they also reported that the moon looked like red and had lines across it, but that could have been, there's actually a picture there as well. And there's a picture there of the crossing as it looks now versus in earlier on in the 70s. But like the moon can look very red, and if there's trees near it, like in the line of sight, then it can look like lines across the red object, right? But the author was able to basically go along the entire route and, seeing that the moon was basically where the witnesses said it was. There was some azimuth issues, but, people can be pretty bad about recalling the angle, but it was still basically in the ballpark of where the moon was meant to be. And I found this a very nice study because it was very technically well done. I think the author did his due diligence and tried to basically ask questions about like, what else could this have been? But I mean, it was definitely the moon. So that's the point. And yeah, one of the lady in the van who was pregnant, she was basically didn't care that it was a UFO. She said something like, let UFOs be UFOs, but I've got to deliver a baby. So she was in a bit of a hurry. But I think they did luckily get to the hospital and she was able to deliver. But I don't really want to go through all the technical stuff here. But Jeff, do you have any comments to make?
I mean, one of the things, like you mentioned, was that the date was wrong, the year was wrong, and that's going to be very important when you try and, like, say, match something up to where the moon was in the sky, at that time of day and night on that year. And so, like, the original investigator, basically they had said that the moon had already set at this point. It couldn't have been a moon. That turned out to be false. The moon was still up at that time. In fact, the moon happened to basically start to set right when the object disappeared from view. So this is why it's important. Like the original, this article came to most people through that Flying Saucer Review article, which, got the year wrong. And even various other publications got it wrong. And it wasn't until he did a little bit of searching and came across some websites. In fact, he came across the same website that I posted on the Emilson case that has some files on the Emilson case and the Galena case and some of those other Polish cases, that they found that the case was actually, like I said, 1979. Then they were able to properly look up where the moon and stuff was in the sky at this time and found that it matched, like you said, pretty much as you would expect them to see at that point. And so this is what happens. Like one bad bit of information at the very beginning can really derail like an entire investigation. And the kind of funny thing is, though, is that the person that wrote this original article that got the year wrong actually talked to the witnesses, investigated it personally, and spoke to them, I think supposedly right after, not that long after it happened or whatever. Like, so, I mean, it's odd that they get the year wrong and that, led to some mistakes. But yeah, it's an interesting case that a lot of people, that you would think, like, how could these people be so confused for such a duration of time? How could they think something was a UFO when it was the moon? But there's a lot of reasons why that can happen. They talk about that moon illusion, which is when like the moon is closer to the horizon, it appears bigger than it really is, because it's in comparison to, say, like a small house, for example. Whereas when it's up in the sky, there's really no reference, and so your mind plays tricks.
And also the street lights might have acted as, some of the witnesses reported that they saw like lights beneath the main spacecraft, but those could have been street lights.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that it really matched up really well with the geography of the road that they were driving along. And yeah, I thought that the author did a really good job as well, because like he was even able to account for how the moon, or how the purported UFO appeared to be changing directions.
Yeah, the movements
at these different locations.
So the movements could be explained by those turns that they had to do. Creating an illusion that the moon was moving over here, but that's just how the car was moving when they were turning on the roads. And
yeah, I thought this was a really good chapter, and I really highly recommend people read it to see, because the moon can look really weird, especially when it's very close to the horizon. And this
section that you just had up there was great. it talks about how inaccurate people are in their estimates of things, and studies that they've done, and how people misreport sizes and azimuth and elevation and all that, how they regularly overestimate or get those things wrong.
Yeah. It's really hard to estimate how high something is over the horizon, and this is this shows the landscape. So the moon could actually be very low to the horizon, and still be visible, basically, as they were driving along this road.
Or it could even be above the horizon, but as they're, depending on the angle, look like it's landed on the road or the horizon, because it's different in the elevation of the road. So where the car is lower than where it looks like the horizon is, because it's a false horizon. That's not the real horizon. That's a hill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also there's a certain point where I think that it sounded like what happened was they thought that it was in front of the trees, but it was actually behind the trees.
Yeah.
And so what they were seeing, the details on the object that they were seeing, were actually caused by the trees, and this, I think, likely created an illusion too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a picture they show like of trees in front of the moons, and right there.
Yeah, this is how the moon can look under different conditions. The author took these pictures. So this is what the moon looks like, with narrow cloud bands in front of it, and then here's the moon with tree branches in front of it.
And the witnesses described, like they said, shells or like these bands like across like the light, like, and you can see bands or shells.
Yeah, and he didn't actually describe the moon illusion in the main article, but the moon illusion is not really well explained, and there's various different proposed explanations for it. But basically what happens is that the moon appears to be much bigger when it's closer to the horizon, or when it's closer to objects on the horizon. And you'll notice this. It's a really cool effect, and it affects everyone. And you can see it, when the moon is out, and it's close to the horizon. It really looks a lot bigger than it actually is. Rich is saying it's an optical effect. I don't think it's an optical effect. I mean, I don't think it has to do with well, I don't know what you mean by that exactly, actually.
But, like atmosphere created. I think it's just.
I don't think that the atmosphere causes
illusion.
it. I think it's actually an illusion, that like a spatial illusion.
There are optical effects. Like there's people that post videos. Look, there's two moons in the sky, and that's because it's an optical effect creating an illusion of two moons. But I think in this case, it's like a perceptual.
Yeah, me too. But I mean, I could be wrong. I don't know. I'm not super smart or anything. All right, let's move on to the next chapter.
Let's see. Back to the Barney and Betty Hill case. So this goes into like various aspects of the credibility of the case. So Nigel Watson is not at all doubting the sincerity of Betty and Barney Hill. And Betty did talk about the case a lot after Barney's death. I think what was he, 48 or so when he died? He was still quite young.
Was he even that old?
Yeah. So, but she was still very much into UFOs. Well, she had been for a very long time, actually, even before, apparently, the abduction, the so-called abduction. But, some of her antics afterwards kind of turn some people off, let's say. Like she would talk at conferences, and she sometimes, or at least in one of them, she spoke way too long and she was booed off the stage. I think that's mentioned here.
Mm-hmm.
And so of course that could cut into her credibility. And she had a predisposition to fantasy proness, apparently. So she would think that the aliens were after her or rearranging things in her house. and was trying to silence her, and that, you know, street lamps were UFOs and things of that sort. So she wasn't the most discerning person, but it doesn't mean she wasn't sincere in her, you know, in her belief that she'd been taken aboard a spacecraft. Here it talks about stress as a factor. So certainly there was a stress aspect because they were an interracial couple in the 1960s. And, you know, this is during the time when there was still a lot of, you know, racism and discrimination, etc., and violence against Black people. So, you know, this especially affected Barney, who was, you know, sometimes paranoid. But I mean, I think it was a rational paranoia, if he was in fact paranoid, because, you know, this is something that a white person would not be able to understand in that time, because, you know, they weren't the ones being targeted. So these sorts of fears could easily have played into the story. Barney himself described initially, his recollection was that there was like a Mongolian type face on the alien wearing a sort of leather jacket and a scarf, reminiscent of a Japanese World War II kamikaze pilot. And this figure is also seen as an evil Nazi officer and an Irishman. So there's, again, like a racial aspect there about fear. Physical evidence, there was very little physical evidence. There was her dress, Betty's dress had some sort of powder on it, I think they recovered, but it wasn't shown to be anything special. And there was also like dings heard from the car, you know, in the lead up or the aftermath of the so-called abduction. Like the spacecraft was supposedly following the car, and it made like these zapping sounds or dings on their car, but that could have been caused by like the rear hood not being closed properly. And Barney himself said that I think he had a shotgun, and he could have just been anxious and he didn't close the boot properly.
Yeah, there were 6 strange shiny marks on the trunk, and Betty claimed that when she put a compass over it, it acted bizarrely, but when Barney put a compass over it, nothing happened unusual. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Barney in general is dismissive of the whole incident for quite a while.
Right, and it's really Betty who's driving the narrative. And she's like, interestingly, she's not the one who was really traumatized by this, right? It was more Barney who was much more traumatized, and yet she became sort of upset that one of the psychiatrists was seemingly paying more attention to Barney. Mm-hmm. So, like, in a way, she was trying to still make it more about herself. She felt slighted by that, but it was really Barney who felt the more trauma from this experience. And she was more dominant in the person in the relationship as well, and that's important as well, because in the lead up to the first psychiatry sessions with hypnotic regression that they underwent, she probably talked his ear off about, you know, aliens, because she consumed alien and UFO culture in the lead up, and you know, that probably helped implant certain ideas in Barney's mind as well.
Well, and she had these dreams immediately after this event supposedly happened, and the dreams are effectively identical to the supposed hypnotically recovered memories of the event. And so she'd been feeding Barney these dreams, you know, for a year or two before they saw the psychiatrist. So, and Barney would claim that, like, oh, he didn't know much about her dreams. He hadn't heard them. But later he would also admit that, yeah, he was very well versed on her dreams and he'd heard them repeatedly. So, yeah, Barney had definitely heard this narrative many times from Betty before this hypnotic regression occurred. Through Betty sharing her dream experience. In fact, it's kind of weird in the movie. I just rewatched the movie, which today is the anniversary of when the movie The UFO Incident came out. And in the movie, when they're driving along, they basically in the car scene, she basically wakes up from that dream, and he accuses her of almost crashing the car, because of her dream. And her dream is basically the same thing as the UFO sighting that they had. So there's a big overlap here between the dreams and the UFO sightings. And so when people say how is it that Betty and Barney Hill's recovered memories are so similar to each other when they were regressed separately? They weren't allowed to listen to each other's tapes initially, so how were they so similar if it was not a real event? Well, there's a very plausible explanation for that. It's because Barney had been hearing the story for the last, year, 2 years or whatever.
Yep. And that was plenty of time. And also she described initially the aliens as having big noses, right? Like that comedian.
Jimmy Durant. Yeah. Big old Jimmy Durant nose. Yeah.
But then later the aliens kind of morphed into more like the Bolero Shield type of big-eyed or big-headed aliens, like she's got there. Bolero Shield was an episode of the Twilight Zone, which aired. When did that air? Between the abduction case, the abduction experience, and
it's not the Twilight Zone. It's the Outer Limits.
What did I say?
You said the Twilight Zone. It was a very similar type of show. But
Yep.
I think it was 2 weeks before or something like that, or within 10 days.
It aired on February 10th, 1964. It wasn't the incident. I believe it was before they were hypnotized before this. Yeah, something like that.
And Betty kind of really held on to this experience, and she talked to a lot of ufologists, and there she's got a picture of it. And
is that the one they called Junior? There's 2 sketches. One of the sketches they called Junior.
Let me see. Oh, there it is.
But yeah, one of the main kind of criticisms, or the differences, not criticisms, but differences between the Hill encounter and perhaps later encounters is how human these aliens are. And this is something that, people have talked about in the analysis, is that throughout this whole time, even in the hypnosis sessions, they repeatedly refer to them as men, or, they're like men, So there's some differences, with, how they kind of describe them, but ultimately they're very human-like. And that's something that in later abductions, the form of those, they were smaller and whatnot, but they still were very human-like, not just in appearance, but also in the way they, their environment. They had books like humans do, maps. They were using kind of retro medical technology that wouldn't be, even up to our kind of now advanced standards. Like everything kind of about these guys was human. The fact that there was a mutinous crew. One of the guys said she could have the book, but the other guy countered that and said, no, she can't take that book with her. There's all these things that make a lot of sense to us, and in the behavior of these so-called aliens that really would change in the abduction narratives over time, where the aliens become smaller and kind of more high strange and weird. This encounter is very, very human in nature.
Yes. And the star map as well, that's a huge part of this story. And why many people have believed it as a bona fide, I don't know how to pronounce that word, alien experience. But, it was already problematic from the start, the star map. But then it was Marjorie Fish, who made the 3D model in her living room. Mm-hmm. And she supposedly found this match with the orientation. And so it was Zeta Reticuli was meant to be the star system of the aliens. But then other satellites brought back more accurate star distance catalogs. And then so that throws off the, star map, the correlation with Zeta Reticuli. But other star systems have been touted as the home of the aliens. So it's kind of absurd discussion about that. It's basically just astrology or numerology, because you can find a pattern wherever if you search hard enough. But then when one is debunked, people still want to find another one.
Well, that's what Sagan did in Contact. they looked at the star map and kind of demonstrated that like it really, you could like find a pattern in any amount of random data like that, like you could probably find countless patterns that match her map looking at stars from maps from different angles. Like, so it's, and if I remember correctly, even Marjorie Fish, before she died, basically said that her map was, invalid. She agreed it was no longer valid anymore. So,
but Stanton Friedman, still pushed it.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
I once actually contacted Stanton Friedman by email, and I told him, how do you account for the fact that like now the distance catalogs are different? Wouldn't that just like invalidate the original correlation? And he's like, well, of course they've changed because we get new data in science. So he wasn't answering the question at all.
Yeah,
that was like a massive red flag for me.
Yeah, and like Amy says in the chat, like this really introduced Zeta Reticula into the UFO field, which then Bob Lazar, would pick up. He'd even name a company after it. Zeta Reticula would become the home of the gray aliens, like for the rest of ufology, kind of because of this. I want to point out one of the things that, and this is one of the things that really stood out to me about her story, is how absurd the idea that these aliens would be asking her on this map, which one is you? Like, that just makes no logical sense to ask someone. Like, for one, like they point out in this thing, charts aren't much use in spaceships hopping between stars, wormholes, space warps, and Z processes no human can understand. Like, the other thing is that, those charts, how would Betty have any clue what she is on an alien-produced chart, from their perspectives and the way they do things? Like, I mean, the fact that they'd ask her that question is just nonsensical in my mind, and I always thought was just absolutely silly.
Yeah, aliens who like come here and then they've got no clue what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the other arguments in a lot of these other analysis and books, is that these aliens seem kind of, again, clueless about how to operate. They don't seem to have any sort of standard, methodology in place. They kind of bumble around. Like the other aliens that we see now in abductions, they seem to have some sort of plan or strategy that they operate by and that they stick to. And like these guys just seemed kind of like, fairly incompetent.
Yeah. And that's a fairly common thing in these little people encounters, actually. They're doing this sort of nonsensical stuff. But on page 224 of the PDF, there's of the actual, the book. It's 225 of the PDF, but racial aspects. So this talks more about like the racial dimension. So here it says, charts aren't much use in spaceships hopping between stars through wormholes using space warp or the Z process, which no human mind could ever understand. These are images of ships and the sea. These are sailors. What kind of sailors? Still people, slavers, of course. We have all overlooked this because we are not black. This is the central fear which grips Barney. The terrible others who are both us and not us are going to take him back into slavery. Betty comes from the dominant white culture. She cannot feel the fear of being turned back into a slave. She can stand up to the crew. In her vision, the sailors are more like a chaotic pirate crew. So again, it's like the power indifference. She can sort of talk back to them, but like he feels like he can't. He's got no power. So I found that a very interesting aspect. David Halperin, in his book Intimate Alien, he talks about like the possibility that this story could be rekindling a sort of basal fear that Barney had, maybe a transmitted fear like through generations, and that this story sort of erupted into consciousness as an expression of, slave ships and that sort of thing. Do you think that's plausible?
Yeah, it's not like the first. There's a paper by who's it by? I can't remember who it's by, but there's actually a paper that compares alien abduction narratives to historic slavery narratives, and the similarities between the two. I'll point out that little segment that's quoted that you were just reading from up there is actually part of a much longer segment written by Peter Rogerson, which I'm sure if you followed that source down, he would have told you who it was. But this basically, Nigel Watson, who wrote this chapter, wrote this book, Captured by Aliens, which is a history and analysis of American abduction claims. And it basically goes into like a lot more detail than this. And that section there is just a smaller quote of a quote that's like a page and a half in the book, which goes into the social context like in more detail. I think that one of the interesting things about, I think it's weird how so many people want to dismiss the racial aspects of this case and act like they're not relevant. Even a lot of skeptics I've seen like don't even want to broach this aspect of the case. Like they want to stick to trying to like I don't know, debunk it through scientific means, like it was a star or whatever, you know. But they want to kind of dismiss it. And even John Fuller in his book kind of tries to dismiss the racial aspects. He tries to kind of downplay Barney's actual fears and anxieties of being a mixed race couple. And they actually have quotes. And this is one of the things that was talked a lot about in the chapter on the Fuller book, in this book, Alien Abductions by Terry Matheson, is how despite in this book, they repeatedly say they were not too worried about stuff like that. Elsewhere in the book, they specifically talk about how worried Barney was about these various incidents, how worried he was going to a restaurant when they were up in Canada on this trip because he saw some boys that he thought looked like hoodlums. He obviously had a lot of racial anxieties because he was carrying a handgun in the back of his car in case he was accosted, you know, by hoodlums. And they had previously been accosted on a road by hoodlums. So there was obviously this great fear. And later in this part by Peter Robeson, he actually talks about at this time, Betty and Barney, like he doesn't provide evidence, but he speculates they may have been the only interracial couple in all of New Hampshire in this year period. That the amount of Black people in New Hampshire at the time was very, very small. And as you mentioned, the kind of the status, how Betty kind of had this higher status, they regularly referred to as Betty Barrett of New Hampshire, it says at the top there, because she was from this prestigious family. She had, you know, a high status job that was higher status than Barney's. She kind of, they use some terminology that I perhaps we're not comfortable using these day and age in the full quote, but that she basically kind of wore the pants in the relationship. She was the dominating figure in this relationship. And you know, they again go on to later state here that even Dr. Simon basically believed this was a case of amnesia and racial anxieties that, you know, Barney was suffering from. So I think it's important to take this into consideration, and that could have been played a role. One of the things they talk about in one of these other chapters was how one of the things with alien abductions people talk about is screen memories. And the idea is that people create these memories to kind of cover up the trauma of the alien abduction that happened. So you see an owl in your memory or a deer or something like that, instead of the traumatic experience with the aliens you had. But like this guy points out, people seem to fail to recognize, to go a little bit further with that, if that's a screen memory, perhaps the alien abduction memory is a screen memory for an actual human trauma that you experienced. So if you can accept that your brain's being rewritten with a screen memory to cover up an alien trauma, perhaps that alien trauma is actually just a screen memory for something they experienced. Maybe they encountered somebody on the road. And in fact, later, like a week or two later, when Betty on the road would, when there'd be a car blocking part of the road, she freaked out. She like had a panic attack because another car was blocking themselves on the road, which might imply that she had just experienced a similar event where, again, they were accosted by hoodlums on the road, like they had previously been.
Those are excellent points. I think the paper you might have been referring to is this one, the Del J. Rose paper.
Yeah, that's it.
Also, I wanted to say something about the on the previous page. Oh wait, where did it go? Oh yeah, okay, sorry. He points out there are several fantasy or folkloric elements to the encounter, like visitors to the fairy otherworld. Betty is not allowed to take away a souvenir as physical proof of her experience. And the Calendrier des Bergers, a 15th century French calendar, shows demons torturing people by inserting long needles into their stomachs, indicating a primal fear generated long before flying saucers took to the skies. It's interesting to note that there's a lot of parallels between alien abduction narratives and certain types of lore from the time of the witch trials in Europe and in New England. So I think it's interesting to think about how there could be parallels between. I'm having trouble trying to say what I'm trying to say, but basically, like, it could be that, you know, like, people might sometimes have genuine anomalous experiences, or they could have experiences like I think Barney's case here, he might be drawing from unconscious anxieties and stuff like that, and or a person could just make a story up, and they can still potentially operate in the same ways. Like, the narrative might operate in the same ways, regardless of where the report of an experience came from. If that makes sense. Luis?
Yeah.
What I can't pronounce their name, but they're asking whether the couple was involved socially with Air Force intelligence people, because they did report the sighting, and they were told, weren't they, that like 2 or 4 hours beforehand there'd been a radar return, which the Air Force thought was a balloon. So like, that doesn't, I mean, even if there was such a return, like, it doesn't even match really a spaceship. Like, it could easily be a balloon, but I don't know if they knew people in the Air Force specifically.
They were also involved with one of besides for Walter Webb, the other two people to first investigate the case was as engineer Robert Homan and C.D. Jackson, which I believe they were with IBM or whatever, but it's also speculated that they were the CIA or had contracts with the CIA, or at least at some point in time. But that may also be who people are referring to. Those are the guys that came up with this idea that Betty Hill was a transducer, that she could basically communicate with the UFOs and bring them down to be viewed. And everyone from like Hynek they asked Hynek to come, but he sent valet in his place, would go to try and see Betty basically call down these UFOs. And it was always so dumb because it was like fireflies or something, and not actual UFOs. But yeah, the Homan and Jackson might be who some people are referring to. There's also a major James McDonald, that's from the Air Force, that people are talk about a lot, not to be confused with James McDonald. I'll point out another interesting thing I found in James McDonald's files this week, talking about the Hill case and Homan and Jackson, was that they talked about the breakdown of the profits on the book and who got the money from this. And it was 40% went to the Hills. So more money went to the Hills than John Fuller. 30% went to John Fuller, and 30% went to Benjamin Simon. So they split 30%. They each got 30%, and the Hills got 40% of this, which combined, I guess, with their totals for the movie eventually and other things, it's estimated that Betty and Barney died, but they had made at least $250,000 off their story. So that's no
that's
small
still 20% per. That's still 20% per hill. Each of the hills.
Yeah, but Barney died 4 years later. So.
Yeah. Amy also brought up in the chat that Barney died of complications from an ulcer, which could have been due to stress as well. And I'm not sure if you mentioned this or not, Luis, but it seems to me like Betty was really the dominant person in this marriage, really, and that she not only really pushed the story and the abduction story forward, but like that. Well, I mean, she definitely had like more of a dominant role in terms of the whole abduction affair, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And that argument is relevant, I guess, somewhat in when they talk about whether it was like a folie-à-deux scenario, which they mentioned in the paper, is that because in some psychological research, particularly originally, this isn't really considered necessary these days, is that they felt that one of the characters, there had to be kind of a dominance asymmetry in the relationship for a folie-à-deux to occur. And so, and in this case, it would have been Betty, and we know, she was sharing her dreams, and he was just kind of picking them up. But I think they meant, I don't know if it's this paper. This is a problem when you read several papers about this in the last week. You don't remember which one it came from. But they mentioned that the current kind of definition of like folie-à-deux or like shared delusions don't actually require a more dominant personality. That may be a factor, but it's not necessarily required. But in this case, I think it's absolutely true that Betty was the more dominant personality in this relationship.
All right, Luis, did you want to say more about the chapter?
I just saw there about Immanuel Velikovsky and his theories about planets moving around in relatively recent time, and apparently Betty had been reading stuff like that and even wrote a letter to Velikovsky. So she was definitely into the kind of the alien lore and UFO stuff for a long time, especially afterwards.
So yeah, one of the main arguments, like people say, like, and even Kathleen Martin, her niece, puts this forward, is that like it's false. It's a myth that she was into UFOs beforehand. And like I say, as we can see here, her own letter, she said since 1950 she was interested in this worlds in collision. So we know she had exposure to international knowledge. Betty Hill would tell Swedish researcher Klaus Vaughn that 3 years before their abduction, her entire family witnessed a UFO crash, and that she actually had crashed UFO debris that she was holding on to, and she believed that that's why her and Barney were abducted, was to get the crashed UFO debris that she still was holding on to from the crash saucer that her family saw, a couple years before. She also previously talks about UFO sightings like her grandma or mother had, long before this event. And one thing we also know is that one of the first, at least as far as in this topic, it wasn't even a week that had passed before Betty wrote Donald Kehoe to share her story with NICAP. So for a person that, supposedly the part of the credibility was that they did not want their story out. They only told it to very close family and friends, and they held on to it until allegedly it was leaked to a newspaper who published the story in the Boston Traveler, and they were mad about that because they didn't want people to know about it. But quite frankly, that's nonsense, because by that point, they were already helping John Fuller with his book Incident on Exeter with local New Hampshire UFO sightings. In fact, that's why they asked Fuller to write the book after the Boston Traveler articles dropped. So this entire idea that like they were trying to keep this secret is just counter to all the evidence, particularly since we know, how did that newspaper get enough information to be able to print 2 long articles or whatever about the case in the first place? It's because we know Betty and Barney had already given lectures at a local UFO study group, which a reporter had recorded on tape, telling their story. How did that UFO study group hear about the case if they weren't interested in telling their story? So this is one of the major inconsistencies, is that they really upplay this fact that they didn't want to tell anyone. They try to keep it secret. And that's just not, that they didn't have knowledge about UFOs. And that's just not true. One of the other inconsistencies that comes about their pre-knowledge of UFOs that some of these other authors make a point of is, if they didn't know about UFOs, why were they so scared about a light in the sky that they saw? How would they know how to even interpret that as a UFO to be afraid of, that they're being followed by something, if they had no previous knowledge of the topic? Somebody with no previous knowledge of the topic, if they see just a light in the sky, they don't think a whole lot about it. They certainly have no reason to get excessively scared about it. So these are just some of the many kind of inconsistencies that they kind of bring up in this and other kind of analysis of the case. One of the other cool things I just want to mention was the accidental awareness and how Barney supposedly during a general anesthesia procedure almost woke up and kind of remembered what he wasn't supposed to remember under anesthesia, and how this hypnosis could have been a recollection, bringing back that memory of accidental awareness that he happened during this general anesthesia event. So I thought that was kind of interesting as well.
Mm-hmm. And wasn't there also the star map? I think Cal Korff made this point a while ago about the planetarium that they may have gone to. Did you hear about that? So like they went to a planetarium and it looked like very similar to the star map.
Oh, that sounds vaguely familiar. I can't quite remember. Yeah, that sounds right, but I don't remember where I've read that. But yeah, I mean,
and maybe that's what the commenter is saying. I don't know if it was on the route though, but
okay. So that gets into one of the things it's also important to note about this case is even these skeptics don't deny there was a UFO sighting, that there was some stimulus that started this whole thing off. What's in doubt more is the whole abduction narrative that came from that. So as far as the actual what they saw in the sky, like one of the things one author points out is that when she talks about it, she talks about a light, I think like up, you kind of off from the moon somewhere, but she only mentions one light. When there is actually at that point in time, when they pull up, you know, the star maps and stuff, that there was actually two planets, Saturn and Jupiter, in the sky next to the moon at the time. In fact, I think they were saying Jupiter would have been the third brightest thing in the sky, you know, second to the moon and Venus at that night. And she doesn't mention any of that, but Betty does make a point of saying she doesn't have any knowledge of astronomy or what's up in the sky. So that initial thing that they saw driving could have just been, you know, like bright Jupiter in the sky that through, you know, parallax effects of driving the car and whatnot that they were kind of confused by. There's also arguments that what they saw could have been the lights, I believe, on one of those like kind of ski resorts, you know, that they passed or one of those towns on the hill, that it could have been like lights from that. Or even like forest lookout towers, kind of like in the Travis Walton case, that it could have been a light like that. So it's unclear what they actually saw. I don't think anybody doubts they saw something that led them to believe they had a UFO sighting. It's just more this later stuff that kind of is in doubt.
Rich asked, wasn't there some landmark on their route that is similar to the description of the UFO? And I think he's talking about the description, the more detailed description, and not just the light in the sky description, but the one that came later. Amy says, yes, there was. Do you guys know about that?
No,
hard to see. You mean like that thing?
Yeah, probably. I think that's what he's referring to.
But what would that have been?
Well, he was saying that it was some sort of landmark or something. Like a
lookout tower, or maybe
or a ski thing, lights on a ski down thing. Yeah. The problem is, though, again, when they talk about is whether they could have actually seen that much detail. Like whether they could have, because they claim to see the leaders in the windows through the craft, but yet at the same time, they said it was too far away to see, that they would need binoculars to even see it. So like there's all these contradictory statements where they imply that it's like they can't get a clear view, but yet while giving very detailed descriptions of what they supposedly saw. So you kind of, I think you have to take some of these more detailed drawings with a grain of salt, because I'm not sure they could have even seen details like that. And they specifically say they couldn't. They needed binoculars in order to see stuff.
So basically, an interesting case, but definitely, well, I don't want to say like, you know, philosophically, we can't rule anything out, but, you know, to a practical, or for all practical purposes, we can rule out an alien visitation.
Yeah.
But I find it interesting that Stan Friedman, you know, like he was supposedly one of the more serious UFO researchers, right? He would describe himself as a skeptic because he checks things.
Supposedly.
He believed in a lot of really, you know, debunked stuff, like not just the Betty and Barney Hill case, but also the Flatwoods Monster, I believe. He gave that a lot of credence as like an extraterrestrial or paranormal event. I think he also resuscitated the Arizona crash or the Aurora crash, and
The
Roswell as well.
Yeah. That whole skeptic thing is funny because
Aztec crash.
Which one? Sorry?
Aztec.
Aztec. Did I say Aztec?
Oh, you said Arizona, but that's what I figured you meant.
Aztec. Yeah.
No worries.
he may have talked about Kingman, Arizona crash as well. Who knows?
Oh, okay.
Actually, one of the rhetorical strategies that this guy talks about is this idea of the skeptic, and the reason why these people like Fuller and other people frame themselves as skeptics is because that makes the story more believable. Because if you convince the skeptic of it, then there's got to be something to it. And so it's one of the kind of rhetorical strategies you continue to see. You saw perhaps first used in Interrupted Journey and continue to be repeated later on, was that I was skeptical, but then, because it supposedly adds credence like to the whole kind of aspect. One of the other rhetorical strategies was including an expert, Dr. Benjamin Simon, even though actually, if you read in here, he's actually very careful to say what he's endorsing. And it's next to nothing that's actually in the book. And he actually points out some of the problems with hypnotism and how it's not so much as a method of getting at truth. It's just telling you what that person believes to be true, which may or may not have anything to do with like reality. It just means that person may believe what they're saying. But you wouldn't know that because, the way they frame things and introduce experts, and it's gotten to be such a thing that now they say that pretty much any abduction book that includes an expert like that is probably being used out of context or to lend credence to something that it doesn't really lend credence to. A lot of books use like Jalen Hynek now, or books would then use Jalen Hynek to write like forwards to, for example, to lend credence. And like Hynek in one of the books, I believe, talks about how because UFO sightings are real, then that somehow leads credence to abductions, that maybe abductions are real, even though many of these authors in these books point out there's no reason actually, because UFO sightings happen doesn't necessarily mean abductions are happening. Like UFO sightings happening does not actually prove abductions are happening. And so to bring in these UFO experts to talk about all the great UFO sighting data doesn't actually add support, but to the reader it does. To the reader, they eat that kind of stuff up. And it makes it sound more scientific, and like there's really something to it because they've hauled out these experts, which appear at least to agree with the subjects of the books.
Mm-hmm.
And that symposium, all this kind of resulted in this symposium that happened in 2000. That was actually put on by scam artist and piece of garbage Joe Firmage. Who used some of his money to get a lot of these people together, like Marcello Truzzi, famous skeptic who eventually left PsyCop, just do his own thing and create the word Zeticism. People like Robert Schieffer, Dennis Stacy, Eddie Ballard, Hillary Evans, Greg Sando, like Nigel Watson was there, and Martin Krodemeyer and Walter Webb, and they eventually put this book out. Where these guys have papers that analyze the case. It was basically a conference that was a mix of kind of pro and skeptics, and got them together to kind of talk their issues and the points out. And of course, nothing really was solved at the end of the day. But there are some very interesting papers worth reading, at least in this book. Yeah, that's really funny, is that out of the whole conference, not a single person, though, would describe Betty Hill as a credible witness, even though they were willing to accept her claims of abduction. Because one of the things, so like we mentioned, later on, Betty would come to basically believe almost everything was a UFO that she saw. And so some people argue that, if she's so fantasy prone and so easy to accept something's UFO sighting, why should we believe the abduction case? But a lot of the people that do believe the abduction are easy to dismiss her later credulity as that she was kind of influenced by UFO people, like that kind of took over her life. But she wasn't like that during the abduction. Like this developed later on after the fact. So we can trust her abduction. We just can't take her credible now because she's kind of, out there. Which, I guess that's up to someone if they want to believe that. See, even Phil Klass doesn't deny that a sighting happened. He's He believes there was some real stimulus.
Yeah.
People probably also want to check out Matthew Bowman recently wrote a book on the Hill case, specifically kind of about the racial context and anxieties involved with the case. And there's a video that he talks about it on C-SPAN as well from the San Antonio Book Fair this year that people can find online.
Yeah, I think, yeah. Looks like Emily Louise might be working on a video on the Hill case, so I'd be really interesting. I'm really interested to see what comes out of that.
Betty and Barney Hill, in their own words. This is one of many things Kathleen Martin would sell at conferences back in the day. It's unopened. I might have to open it and watch it.
Yeah, this is a very, very famous case. And in the concluding paragraph, the author says, whatever is said, their case is now a cornerstone for belief in alien abductions. For such an important event, the physical evidence is very flimsy, and the witness testimony, although powerful, does not carry much weight as evidence for an encounter with a real spacecraft and its occupants. Did you have anything to add, Louise?
Nope.
All right. On that note,
when Archive comes back up, you can find this on Archive, but Archive's still down. Or you go to Anna's Archive and just download it now. But
yeah.
Same thing with this book.
I might edit that out later. We shouldn't be mentioning other websites because then they'll get taken down.
I don't know about that.
All right. And for our final story, what? Is it not showing up?
What is this Global Disclosure Day scam?
Dang it, the emojis disappeared. I don't know why that happened.
The Men in Black have censored our anti-disclosure emojis.
Dang it, Lou Elizondo, why did you hack my computer? Okay.
They pulled their video. They pulled their video off YouTube.
They pulled it off YouTube?
Yeah, of today's events. They made it private.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know why. Not very open or transparent for people that are all about the disclosure, but.
Okay. And for our final story, the New Paradigm Institute, or NPI, announced their first Global Disclosure Day today and held a 2-hour live-streamed event at 10 a.m. Pacific time. The event was spearheaded by Citizens for Disclosure, a grassroots initiative created earlier this year by NPI. Chapters of the CFD in 43 states and multiple countries organized watch parties to help promote the event. In a press release issued by Solve Advocacy, Jim Garrison, the director of NPI's Washington, D.C. office, was quoted as saying, quote, "Can you mute your mic, please?" That's not what Garrison was saying. That's what I'm saying. I believe whoever is typing, please mute your mic. Thank you. Sorry, the screen kind of small, so I can't actually reach the buttons. Quote, "The burden of proof has shifted. It's no longer about proving that UAP exists. It's now up to those who kept this information secret to prove that UAP don't exist. We are entering a new era," unquote. The proof Garrison is likely referring to is the anomalous taste of vomit that I experienced in my mouth while reading the press release, because otherwise I have no idea what he's talking about. Shifting the burden of proof requires a lot of clear and substantial evidence and stuff. Speakers include Ross Poolshard-Coulthard and Lou. I can't come up with a clever name. Lou Poopy Butthole Lupe Elizondo, among various other people. Red flags everywhere. What was the event like? I have no idea. You really think I'd watch something like that? Come on. Before we go, if you enjoy this show, we would like you to please consider subscribing to our channel, Ufo Sunset. Please also hit the like button and hit the notification bell icon if you'd like to get notified about upcoming videos. And come and join our cozy and intimate live chat. A great plus for joining the live chat is that you can give us constructive feedback live on the air, especially if we make any factual errors. You can also join our Discord, a temporary link to which I will add to the episode description. Sorry, Jeff, I'm going to say it. Here at Ufos, our political and personal views are not the same, and the work of each of us is independent work. Personal views or positions expressed in individual pieces are not those of Ufos, who is not a person, but is a giant egregore that we have summoned with our minds, or the other hosts. Please be sure to check out our respective content. I can be found in the ether. Visit Luis Cayetano's website, ufologyiscorrupt.com, or you will explode into a million little pieces. And you can find Jeff Knox's daily posts on history and the science of UFOs on Twitter or Facebook. Jeff Knox spends all of his time studying UFOs, and he hardly makes any money off of it. Please consider visiting his Patreon page and becoming his patron, or visiting his Ko-Fi and becoming his Ko-Fin. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Luis. Thank you, Simon, Amy, and Rich for joining the chat and joining the cat that hangs out around Jeff Knox's house.
Mysterio?
Mysterio, is that the name?
That's what I've been calling him.
Cool, I like it. Oh, shoot. I did. Okay.
My friend said you should call him Opal, though, because of his very pretty blue eyes.
Yeah.
The goose.
Opal the goose?
No.
That's...
Simon said, what about the duck? I have a goose. Goose named Merge. Yeah.
Oh, what was Opal?
My friend said that's what I should name the cat, is what he said, is because of the pretty blue eyes that it has.
I like Mysterio.
Yeah,
or Mysteria. Mysteria.
Yeah. Merge the goose.
Merge the goose.
Yeah.
Goose.
I heard actual geese flying, and I felt really bad for Merge, because here they're getting to leave the cold weather, going south for winter, and little flightless Merge here is hanging out in the backyard.
Well, thanks again, boys. And thank you to Jeff's patrons. Jeff's patron. Okay. Thank you to Jeff's what is your patron's name?
Kevin.
Kevin. Thank you to Jeff's patron, Kevin. Jeff and all of us highly appreciate that. The money's just going to Jeff. It's just for him. It's not for us. And in the words of the disc, the UFO that can be named is not the eternal UFO.